Hello everyone, today we'll be doing a presentation on the one and only 4chan. So, what is 4chan? 4chan is actually an image board. What that means is that it's kind of like a bulletin board type of website where people post images and topics that interest them. The hierarchy is that you have all these things over here called boards, and in those boards there are things called threads. Threads come and go. Some threads can last for a few hours to even days, or some get permanently deleted within minutes, whether or not they're just pure crap or whether or not they're just not relevant to the topic. So in these threads, there are topics, and in those topics there are threads, and in those threads there are posts. So if you've all used social media, I 100% guarantee you that any of those wacky meme images that you've seen have originated from this website in some capacity, or were created by somebody who's familiar with kind of like the counter-alternative subculture that 4chan has provided. So let's take a look at the history. So this website was actually invented back in the year 2003. I believe October 1st is when it first launched, by this maniac right here named Christopher Poole. Notice his strong jawline. And he actually based 4chan off a pre-existing website called Chan, actually known as 2chan, which is very similar to how 4chan is based off of. It's another bulletin board based image site, but obviously it's all in Japanese. Christopher over here was really into that weird thing called anime, and he wanted to discuss them, but really had no avenue to do it because he didn't speak Japanese, so he went ahead and ripped it off and made his own version of it. So, as you can see here, he actually kind of looks like the main character Andy from Toy Story 3. That'll be important later. Now this is a frog that I found on one of the boards that covers photography. I was thinking of naming it Henry or Jeffrey, but I decided to name it Johansson. Moving on from that, this is kind of how the general overview of a thread looks. When you first go to a thread, it actually shows you from the most recent to the most dated thread through a channel of 10 different web pages. So as you can see here, this is kind of like the middle view of a thread, where here you have your subject line, the image to kind of invoke discussion. You have your post over here, and then another image discussion over here. So, how do threads actually work on 4chan? As you can see here, you can do whatever really you want. If you want, you can put in your name, your email, and this is where you actually put in your tagline for the subject you'll be talking about, the comment, and then over here is where you can attach a file. It supports mostly just static pictures, but you can also upload GIFs. Back in the ye old days, you would actually enter in a CAPTCHA, which are those really fucking annoying things where you have to type in the word that it shows you. Otherwise, in the modern day, you can actually click on this little thing right here. It's also the CAPTCHA that just says that, hey, I'm not a robot, I'm not going to rip off your users. Now, what's really interesting about 4chan is that every post can be posted anonymously. The only data that 4chan will ever collect from you is actually your IP address, and for good reason. Now, there was actually a report done by the University of MIT where it discovered that after going through 500 different threads on the random board, which is where anything goes, people can post anything, the average lifespan for a thread was actually 6.2 hours, and one thread only lasted half a minute. Now, with posts on 4chan, like I said, they're all anonymous, but you can actually also post your own name if you feel so inclined. Now this will actually suspect you to ridiculous ridicule from the other users on 4chan because they'd rather you stay anonymous for whatever reason. But if you do decide to go with a name, those are normally known as trip codes or just trips for short. Look at how happy that Piccolo is. Look at these statistics. Just this year alone, 22 million monthly users. All these mind-boggling numbers. This website's popular and people use the cesspool for whatever reason. So,
wait a second.
yes.
Is there, in terms of administering it, I mean...
Oh, I'll get to that, don't worry. I'll get to the administration. I'll get to who actually keep these animals in line momentarily. They do it for free. Now, 4chan, as I said, has this weird sense of entitlement, where if you're new to it, or if you're not really seasoned in how it works, they're not very welcoming of you. So they kind of have like these rites of passage, these identity barriers for people to kind of jump through. As you can see in the past, there was this little trick where if you could successfully post this picture of a Triforce, you were considered a seasoned user. Now, how does someone become seasoned? How does someone understand that this means to check your numbers to see if they're dubs? How does somebody know about the big guy copy pasta meme? What about this stupid frog over here? How people are able to understand what all of this means is by quote-unquote lurking, which is just picking a board that interests you, because there's a tremendous amount of boards, we'll get into that momentarily as well, and you just lurk through the threads and kind of pick things up as you go. It's like squeezing your way into this niche esoteric friend group and then picking up on all the inside jokes and references. Is there a higher point to it? Of course not. As you can see here, when you actually make a thread, when people actually respond to a post that you've made or a thread that you've made, you get a little thing over here called you. And one of the biggest things that people do when they first join is they try to elicit as many responses as they can, rather through just excessive posting or actually baiting people into responding to them. And I'll touch that topic momentarily. As you can see here, this was my attempt to actually build a report with some users on the video game board, and I decided to go in a different direction, ask if the timeless video game character Wario was actually of libertarian political leanings. I only got one response before a moderator deleted my thread, but it just goes to show that it's a very big game of trial and error to find your niche on this godforsaken website. So, I know this has been a lot to take in, but I know you kids like your cartoons, your SpongeBob. So this is actually every single board on 4chan represented by different pictures. As you can see up here, B, the random board, is represented by that. You have your M board, which is for mecha discussion, your retro video game board. You have, let's see, down here, your comics and cartoons board, do it yourself, pictures. Down here you have your science channel, your social channel, the antithesis of the social channel, the Ship 4chan Says channel, and the, let's see, where is it? I'm having trouble finding it. The Fit channel, where you can discuss exercise regimens, the Toy channel, to discuss all your favorite toys, and of course the Paranormal channel, to discuss any ghost stories that you might have, or just spook out the other users. Many of these boards are considered popular, such as the V board or the Co board, and many of them are pretty much dead boards. For example, the business board over here doesn't really generate much traffic just because it's not very well advertised, doesn't really have an infamous reputation, so doesn't really generate a lot of web traffic. Not many users go to it. However, there's actually a double-edged sword to that, because while it's not popular, that means that there's less chance for threads on that board to actually be relevant to the discussion or just be overall swamped with just superfluous derivative threads. So, getting into the meat and potatoes, this over here is the technology thread. As you can see, there are many pictures of a Mr. Wrote his name down. Give me 1 second. Richard Stallman, who is a pioneer of the free software movement. He is essentially to the technology board, also known as G. It's a little cut off over there. He is G's savior because he has pioneered the fact that people should be switching over to Linux, and that the idea of digital copyright and paying for software shouldn't be a thing. So you can see here there are many discussions regarding that. To give you another example of the board, on every board, the moderators of the board, there are many types of moderators for all different types of board with different responsibilities. They can actually post what's known as a sticky, which is a thread that will never expire on that thread, that pretty much just gives general advice, general rules and how-tos, and general what flies here and what doesn't. Again, as I showed you before, this is a general format of what a post looks like on 4chan. Someone posts a nice little picture to entice discussion, has a subject line over here, talks about their issue that they need advice with, and then people reply with posts. As you can see here, it only took 4 posts for someone to claim that this is bait, meaning that it's something that's not serious, something that shouldn't be taken seriously. So it's a very chaotic brawl of a discussion board. Now, this one is the one I spent most of my time researching just because of its ludicrous nature, the comics and cartoons board. As you can see, there is a lot of discussion about cartoons that people watched when they were children, and that's for good reason. As you see here, this man over here, quote unquote, really fucking loves Winnie the Pooh. So this is another example of a thread discussion on that board. You have your picture, your tagline, which in this case the user decided to remain anonymous and not include a tagline, and then people can respond to the thread with their own pictures or with their own text. As you can see here, this man, a Mr. Truteal, decided to use a trip code and offer nothing to the discussion, as is the way of people who use usernames on this website. So, this board in particular actually opened my eyes to the concept of NEETs, which are people who are not engaged in a profession, employment, or training to be in employment. Now the thing is, as I mentioned earlier, is that the Comics and Cartoons board They focus a lot of discussion on old shows from the early 2000s and the 90s because it's mostly comprised of what we know as man-children. People whose society has given up on, people whose parents have given up on them, people who have stagnated in their 20s and have resorted to making imaginary friends known as tulpas in order to kind of cope with their daily lives. So, as you can see here, I have this picture of This Is My Hole. It was made for me. With the co-board in particular, it's kind of like, a weird way to describe it, it's a containment board for these types of people where it both feeds into this antisocial behavior, but it also can kind of work as a support group, an Alcoholics Anonymous for NEETs, if you will, to kind of build a rapport with other people who are obsessed with these niche interests, but then also kind of work forward to not being as socially degenerate, if you will. Bada bing, bada boom. So now this one, jumping from American cartoons to Chinese cartoons, is the Anime Magna Board. Very similar to Ko, but a little bit more organized. This is also a very famous board that comes out of 4chan. A lot of news headlines come out of this website of people just discussing the most derivative nonsense. As you can see here, we have a thread for the recent episode of Dragon Ball Super, and a lot of magical girl shows. The A board is notorious for being very, very contrarian. If it's popular, then it must be shit. That is the motto with A. So here we have another thread discussion. This person happens to be talking about the differences between Japanese and American cuisine, namely putting an egg on rice. Someone says that that's related to salmonella, and someone says, well, in America, people chug eggs. When I first saw that, I thought this man was chugging urine. Speaking of chugging piss, let's talk about video games. So, as you can see here, a lot of this has to do with just video games of all different types. You have your Japanese games, you have your esports, you have Egoraptor, you have people just claiming that if it's a video game that it's garbage. So there's a lot of similarities between all the boards. There's this like contrarian, very like aggressive, abrasive culture to it, but at its core, there is room for solid discussion. This is actually in the catalog view where you can just scroll down and just pick whatever thread suits your fancy. So the thread I decided to go into, this actually popped up this morning, was a thread about people who were really into Pokemon, but not really into the notion of the Earth being round. So as you can see here, we have a discussion, people going back and forth using Pokemon image reaction faces to talk about whether or not the Earth is actually flat or round and how it pertains to how much they love their Pokemans. So, what's very interesting about V is that back in 2011, a bunch of people actually collaborated together to make their own video game. In this case, this was a visual novel called Kanawa Shoujo, in which you play as somebody who has a physical disability. I believe it has something to do with a heart tremor. And you actually have the ability to form relationships, bonds, and eventually date. Women in the game will also have their own unique physical limitations. For example, this woman over here is deaf, this one's a burn victim, this one has no arms, and I believe this one has no legs. So it was just the intention of it to go back to my previous point before about people who have been given up on or people who have just given up. This is kind of a love letter to that mentality that no matter what limitations you have in your life, whether you've imposed them on yourself or whether life has imposed them on you, that you're still beautiful. You can still do something about it, I guess. Or maybe I'm looking too deep into it. Maybe people just really want a nice little game about dating girls. But anyway, jumping ahead to the year 2014, there was actually a company called the Fine Young Capitalist who, we discussed this in class earlier, about the presence of women in video games. So they actually hosted a contest to have a female character portrayed in a video game that they were producing. There were different tier lists that people could actually donate to. I believe if the tier list hit 5,000, then no matter what your character was, it would have a place in the video game. So the fine people of V actually got together in a very rare moment of community and camaraderie and developed this character here named Vivian James. They actually raised $5,000, donated it to this company, and now have their character in a video game, but it actually gave rise to a very important topic of the year 2014, video game ethics in journalism. Very big pill to swallow. Moving on from that, as I said before, the culture of 4chan, it's very much one of a child lashing out. People are out to either get each other, discuss things. This over here was actually a crossover where someone who was a native to the Futaba channel, 2chan, actually visited 4chan for a spell and went over to the red boards. You see, 4chan, out of all its boards, is split into the work-safe blue boards and the not work-safe red boards. This man in particular, I'm not quite sure which one he was perusing, but he noticed how abrasive people can be. How people try to bait each other and make people intentionally angry for whatever reason, whether just to cause chaos or just to get a kick out of people, or rather just to share in each other's social shortcomings. This man stood up against it all, and said that no matter what, through Dick, unity. So these people, they can be very degenerate, they can be very backward socially, but there's a very morbid, esoteric sense of camaraderie that can be built by using image boards such as this. So, as you asked earlier, who's in charge of making sure that things stay on track, that things don't get too crazy? Well, those people are known as moderators, janitors, and they actually do the moderating of each thread on every board on 4chan for no monetary compensation. It's hard to believe. Now, there's a little bit of an inside joke where if a moderator is too trigger-happy with their power, they are known as a janitor. And this character is actually the janitor from author Josh Morris. As you can see here, we have a few examples of people intentionally trying to get a rise out of the mod and then resulting in their ban. Like I said before, the only information 4chan takes from you is your IP address, and moderators have the right to actually block your IP address from accessing the 4chan server, rendering you incapable of posting. So as we see here, we have a more productive example of underage users trying to use 4chan, especially the not safe for work boards, and then immediately being banned. This user got too close to the fire. He was so close to being 18, but he wasn't. So the moderators, for once in their life, actually did their jobs and banned him. So, I'm sure you've all heard of 4chan being in the news, but let's talk about some actually productive community outreach that 4chan has done. In the year 2014, there was actually an instance of a boy abusing animals, and someone was actually able to track down the videos that he was uploading online. And there was actually another rare instance of a collaboration camaraderie event where people actually got together and was able, by studying geographical images, they were able to track down where this boy lived and were able to report to proper authorities, and the pets were rescued. As you can see here with this image of pools closed, this was actually a digital attempt to bring virtual, I have chicken scratch handwriting, pardon me. Oh yes, to bring virtual awareness to actually the AIDS epidemic and how when it's actually open, well, when open wounds, pardon, let me back up just a bit. The Pools Closed movement was actually a movement on the virtual MMO Habbo to bring digital awareness to handling AIDS exposure at public venues such as pools. And as you see here, I'm sure we've all heard of the recent Burger King foot lettuce crisis. Again, very similar to the animal abuser, they were actually able just to take a look at these videos and collaborate their mutual efforts in a form of like collaborative, sheer like stupidity. And we're actually able to track down this location to a Burger King in Ohio, and the person, the culprit of stepping in the foot lettuce, was actually fired. And then over here, which is probably my favorite, was an actually 6-part back and forth game between the users of the politically incorrect board and Shia LaBeouf in a very rousing game of Capture the Flag. So, to kind of wrap this up in a very, very slapdash bow, do I think 4chan is a good website? Absolutely not. It's garbage. But that being said, it's a necessary website. I'm sure as you all remember when we were children, our parents warned us about the bad people to stay away from on the internet. Does 4chan foster those type of people? Absolutely. But in that same vein, I do believe that there is actual value in an image board website for people to actually discuss their niche interests. Not only that, but this website is kind of a honeypot of sorts, because we need somewhere for those types of people just to have that outlet. Because say if this website was to be shut down tomorrow, all those people who are less than savory will just find different avenues in order to post whatever nonsense they want. Hence the notion of a containment board. 4chan itself does have containment boards. For example, people are really into Pokemon, so they have their own containment board. On the comics and cartoons board, there was a period of time where everyone was obsessed with the My Little Pony show, so they got their own board so they could just push that in some corner and forget about it. But like I said, this type of website is necessary because these people won't go away if this website does. So it's good that there's at least an avenue for them to express their vicious opinions out in the open, that way their IP addresses can be tracked, so just in case there's a suspicious individual or someone's planning some trouble, there's at least a way to track them and have some digital receipts. Now, since you've all been such good children, I have a little bonus for you. So as I said in the beginning of this presentation, 4chan has been the progenitor of many, many classic memes. I'm sure you've been a victim to at least one of them, but this is kind of like the legacy ones. As you see here, you have the Donkey Kong character Lanky Kong, you have the Long Cat, you have a very, very tasteful Peter Griffin meme, and then you have a picture of a girl eating a fish that has been posted without fail to the animated and Magna board every day since May 24th, 2011. But now, you may be asking yourself, what are memes like nowadays? Well, I'd probably present to you deep-fried memes. This is the direction that they've taken. It's nonsensical, it's stupid, and in a weird way, it's kind of beautiful. H. I'm done. Thank you all for your time. Any questions?
Definitely entertaining. And informative.